My daughter-in-law stood at the maternity ward desk and told the nurse, "He is not on the list. He cannot come in." She didn't know I was the reason that wing of the hospital existed. She didn't know I was on the board. And she certainly didn't know I was about to make a single phone call that would change every rule in the building. This is a story about what happens when the most personal family moment collides with cold, institutional power. It's about who really gets to decide what family means at the most vulnerable time. And it's about the single decision I made in that hallway that would redefine every relationship I thought was permanent. My wife Evelyn passed away 6 years ago, ovarian cancer. She was the heart of everything, the reason I worked so hard, the reason any of it mattered. We were married for 38 years. She was a pediatric nurse at Mercy General for 22 of them. She's the reason I first started donating there. A $10,000 check after she died to the children's ward in her name. Then it became a habit. Then it became a purpose. I built Thorn Medical from a garage workshop into a company that supplied precision surgical instruments to half the hospitals in the state. I sold it 5 years ago for a sum of money so large I still feel uncomfortable saying it out loud. My son, David, is 32. He's an architect, a good one. He has his mother's quiet focus, her way of seeing the structure of things before they're built. I was always proud of him. I still am. David married Chloe 3 years ago. She's a corporate lawyer. Sharp, ambitious, comes from a family where every conversation feels like a negotiation. Her father is a retired judge. Her mother runs a nonprofit. They're good people, but there's a formality to them, a wall. At the wedding, her father shook my hand and said, "So you're the man who builds the tools. We're the people who make sure they're used correctly." I laughed it off. I should have heard it for what it was, a statement of hierarchy. The first real crack appeared about a year after the wedding. David and Chloe bought a house, a beautiful modern place in the hills. I offered to help with the down payment, not all of it, just a meaningful portion. Chloe declined, politely, firmly. She said they wanted to do it on their own. I respected that, but David called me later, his voice strained. He said Chloe felt my offer came with unstated expectations. I told him there were none. I just wanted to help. He said he knew, but that it complicated things. That was the first time I felt like a complication in my own son's life. Then came the dinners. We used to have Sunday dinner every week. After Evelyn, it was just David and me, but we kept the tradition. When Chloe entered the picture, it became once a month. Then it became whenever our schedules aligned. The conversations changed too. They were less about life, more about milestones, promotions, vacation plans, a distant, curated version of a family. Chloe began referring to our time together as visits. As in, "We'll schedule a visit soon, Robert." I was no longer Dad, I was Robert. I learned about the pregnancy from a group text message. A sonogram picture sent to me to Chloe's parents to a few friends. The message read, "Thrilled to share our news." I called David immediately. He was happy, buzzing with it. I asked why he hadn't told me in person. There was a pause. He said, "Chloe wanted to tell everyone at the same time, to be fair." Fair. That word started to haunt me. The baby shower was held at Chloe's parents' club. I was invited, of course, but I was seated at a table with David's college friends I hadn't seen in a decade, while Chloe's family occupied the head table with the parents-to-be. I gave them a gift, a trust fund set up for the baby's education, enough to cover college anywhere in the country. Chloe thanked me, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later, I overheard her tell her sister it was a very grand gesture. She didn't say it like it was a compliment. 2 months before the due date, David came to my office alone. He looked tired. He said he needed to talk about the birth plan. Chloe, he explained, was very specific about the hospital experience. She wanted it to be calm, controlled, private. She was designating her parents as the only visitors allowed during the entire 48-hour stay. She cited hospital policy, which, as I knew, gives the mother complete control over who is allowed in the maternity ward. I felt the air leave the room. I asked him, "Where does that leave me?" He couldn't look at me. He said, "After they come home, Dad, you'll be the first to come to the house." I told him his mother worked in that hospital, that I had my name on a plaque in the lobby, that this was my grandchild. He said, "I know, But this is what Chloe needs. Her doctor says stress is a risk factor. She needs to feel secure. He was reciting a script. I could hear her phrasing in every word. I didn't fight him that day. I made my case calmly. I said a grandfather meeting his grandson was a foundational moment, not an intrusion. He listened, he nodded, he said he'd talk to Chloe. The following week, I received a formal typed email from Chloe. It laid out the visitation protocol in bullet points. Her parents would be at the hospital. I would be welcome at their home by appointment after the first week. There were rules about not dropping by unannounced, about calling ahead, about vaccinations. It was a legal document masquerading as a family memo. I replied with one sentence: I look forward to meeting my grandson. The due date was March 15th. I got the text from David at 4:17 in the morning. It's time, heading to Mercy General. I didn't reply. I got dressed. I drove. I arrived at the hospital just as the sun was coming up. I walked through the lobby I'd funded, past the donor wall with my name etched in bronze, and took the elevator to the 4th floor, the new Thorne family maternal care wing. The hallway was quiet. I saw Chloe's parents, the judge and his wife, sitting in the waiting area. They looked up, surprised. Before I could say a word, Chloe's mother stood and walked quickly to the nurse's station. She spoke in a low, urgent voice to the charge nurse. Then Chloe herself appeared at the door of a room down the hall. She was in a hospital gown. She looked at me, then turned and said something to someone inside the room. David emerged. He walked toward me, his face pale. "Dad, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to see my grandson," I said. "Chloe's list, you're not on it. The nurses can't let you back." I looked past him to the nurse's station. The charge nurse, a woman named Linda according to her badge, gave me a polite, professional, implacable smile. It was the smile of someone following policy, no exceptions. That's when Chloe walked up to stand beside David. She didn't look at him. She looked directly at me, and then she turned to Nurse Linda. "He is not on the list," Chloe said, her voice clear and cold in the hallway. "He cannot come in." She had no idea what she had just started. I didn't say a word to Chloe. I didn't look at David. I just turned and walked back to the elevator. The silence in that hallway was louder than any argument. I rode down to the lobby, my reflection staring back at me in the polished bronze doors. I was a ghost in my own building. The foundation I had poured millions into felt like quicksand. I got in my car, but I didn't drive home. I drove to my office downtown, the one I kept after selling the company, a quiet space with a view of the river. I sat at my desk and I did nothing for a full hour. I just stared at a photograph of Evelyn holding David as a baby, taken in a hospital room that looked nothing like the sterile luxury of the wing I'd just left. Her smile was tired, radiant, inclusive. She would have been horrified. This wasn't about a visit. This was a declaration of territory. Chloe wasn't just controlling a moment. She was redrawing the map of our family, and she had used the authority of the hospital, my hospital, to do it. That's when the anger came. Not a hot rage, but a cold, crystallizing clarity. She had invoked policy. She believed policy was an impartial wall. She didn't understand that I helped write the policies. I picked up the phone, not to call David. I called Marcus Wellington. Marcus was the chairman of the board of directors at Mercy General. We served together for 8 years. He was also the man who had personally asked me for the lead gift to build the maternal care wing. I got his assistant, who said he was in a meeting. I said, "Tell him it's Robert Thorne. Tell him it's about the Thorne family wing, and tell him it's urgent." Marcus called back 20 minutes later. "Robert, everything all right? The wing not falling down, I hope." He was trying to be light. I didn't match his tone. "Marcus, I need you to pull the visitor authorization logs for the maternity ward, 4th floor, for today, March 15th, from 6 a.m. onward." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear the shift in his posture through the phone. "Robert, you know I can't do that. Patient privacy. HIPAA, what's this about?" "It's about my daughter-in-law, Chloe Thorne, who gave birth this morning in the wing named after my family." It's about her submitting a visitor list that explicitly excludes me, the child's grandfather and the lead donor to that unit. And it's about a charge nurse named Linda who enforced that exclusion while standing under a plaque with my name on it. The silence this time was heavier. "Oh," Marcus said finally. "Oh, Robert, I'm so sorry. That's an impossible situation." "Is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, the policy is being applied exactly as written. The mother has absolute discretion. The hospital is complying. Everything is functioning by the book. And I am on the outside of a glass wall I paid to install. What do you want me to do?" His voice was cautious, the voice of a man who sees a legal and public relations landmine materialize in front of him. "I don't want you to do anything, Marcus. I want you to understand the position your hospital, and by extension, your board has been placed in. A major donor and sitting board member is being barred from a foundational family moment within the facility his donations built, due to a policy the board itself oversees. This isn't a family squabble anymore. It's a governance question." I could almost hear him thinking about headlines, about donor relations, about the ethics committee. "Have you spoken to David?" he asked. "David is following his wife's lead. My speaking to him changes nothing. The authority resides with Chloe and by proxy, with the hospital enforcing her wishes. My question to you, as chairman, is this. Does the hospital's policy have any mechanism for considering extraordinary circumstances? Or is it an iron gate?" He sighed. "It's an iron gate, Robert, and for good reason. We can't have board members or donors influencing patient care or access. It's the first line in our conflict of interest policy. If we made an exception for you, even for this, it would unravel everything. It would be a scandal." He was right. I knew he was right. The very influence I theoretically possessed was the one thing I could never ethically use. The system was designed to prevent someone like me from doing exactly what I wanted to do. The irony was so perfect it was painful. "So the policy is absolute," I stated. "It has to be," he said, his voice firming up with institutional resolve. "For the integrity of the hospital. I'm sorry, Robert, truly." "Thank you for the clarity, Marcus," I said and hung up. That was the pivot, the moment I understood the battlefield. I couldn't go through the front door. Chloe held the key, and the hospital was duty-bound to lock it for her. Appealing to my son was futile. Appealing to the institution was a violation of its core ethics. I was in a checkmate of my own making. I spent the rest of that day in a strange, detached calm. Friends texted congratulations. I didn't reply. I knew the baby was a boy. David had sent a single text. "Ethan Robert Thorne, 7 pounds 6 oz. Mom and baby are perfect." He'd included my name, a small, desperate peace offering. I stared at the photo. He had a full head of dark hair. I didn't write back. The next morning, I put on a suit and went to the hospital. Not to the 4th floor, to the administrative offices on the 10th. I walked past the donor relations department, where my portrait hung on the wall. I scheduled a meeting with Sheila Brunner, the vice president of hospital operations. Sheila was a no-nonsense former nurse who ran the place with terrifying efficiency. She also knew every dollar I'd ever given. When I entered her office, she stood, her expression a professional mask of concern. "Robert, please sit. I heard about the situation." Marcus filled me in. "We're all so terribly sorry for the personal distress this is causing." I took a seat. "I'm not here for an apology, Sheila. I'm here for information. I want to understand the visitor policy from an operational standpoint, not as a grandfather, as a board member concerned with policy implementation." She blinked, recalibrating. "Of course, it's quite straightforward. Upon admission to the maternity ward, the mother, as the patient, is given a form. She designates who is permitted to visit. That list is entered into the nursing station's secure system. Only those names are granted access past the secure doors. It's for safety, security, and the patient's comfort. And there is no override, not for a medical emergency, not for a security concern. The only override is if the mother herself amends the list, or in the case of a verified court order, such as a custody ruling. The clinical staff cannot alter it. Administration cannot alter it. The policy is deliberately rigid to protect the patient from external pressure. External pressure, I repeated. So if, for example, the mother's own parents were to pressure her to exclude someone, the policy would protect that exclusion. Sheila shifted slightly. The policy is blind to motivation, Robert. It honors the patient's stated wish, full stop. I see, I leaned forward. And the funding for the security system for that wing, the keycard access, the software, the training for the nursing staff on this protocol. She knew where this was going. Her gaze didn't waver. The capital for the security infrastructure was part of the philanthropic grant for the wing's construction. The operational training is part of our standard budget. A budget reviewed and approved by the board I sit on. Yes. So I am, in effect, barred by a system I funded and governed at the request of a family member, and the institution's ethical framework prevents me from intervening. That is an accurate if stark summation, she said quietly. I stood up. Thank you for your time, Sheila. You've been very helpful. I left her office. The facts were now clear and inescapable. I had lost, not just the visit, but the moral high ground. Any action I took from a position of power would be an abuse. I drove home feeling 100 years old. The following days were a fog. I received a formal birth announcement in the mail. Chloe and David Thorne joyfully announced the birth of Ethan Robert. I put it on the mantle next to Evelyn's picture. The silence in the house was absolute. Then, a week after Ethan was born, my doorbell rang. It was David, alone. He looked hollowed out, shadows under his eyes deeper than mine. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just walked in and sat on the couch in my living room, his head in his hands. She won't let me bring him here, he said, his voice muffled. I tried, Dad. I said it was wrong. I said you deserve to meet your grandson. She said the home visitation protocol starts next week and you can schedule a time then. She said you showing up at the hospital proved you couldn't respect boundaries. I didn't offer him a drink. I didn't sit. I stood by the fireplace. What do you want me to say, David? He looked up, his eyes red. I want you to tell me what to do. I'm stuck. I love my wife. I love my son. And I'm watching her dismantle my family, and I don't know how to stop it without destroying everything. His raw pain was the first crack in the icy professionalism that had encased me. You are not stuck, I said, my voice low. You are making a choice. You are choosing her definition of family over every other one. You stood in that hallway and watched her banish me. You didn't say a word. That was a choice. What was I supposed to do? Cause a scene? Fight with her right after she gave birth? Yes, the word exploded out of me, startling us both. If that's what it took to remind her that you are a father asterisk and a son, that families are built on inclusion, not exclusion. Your mother would have torn that hospital apart if anyone tried to keep her from you. He flinched. We never talked about his mother like that. This is different, he whispered. No, I said, the anger subsiding into a deep, weary sadness. It's not. You're afraid of her, David, and I can't fix that for you. He left shortly after, more broken than when he arrived. That night I made a decision. If I couldn't use my power as a donor and I couldn't rely on my son as an ally, I would use the only thing I had left, my story. I called a journalist, not from a tabloid. From the city's major paper of record, the Chronicle, I asked for Martin Ford. He covered philanthropy and civic institutions. We met at a few charity galas. I told him I had a story about modern philanthropy, hospital ethics, and family conflict. I told him it would require impeccable sourcing and nuance. He was intrigued. We met at a quiet restaurant the next day. I laid it out fact by fact. My donations, the board seat, the birth, the policy, the exclusion. I showed him the birth announcement. I did not paint Chloe as a villain. I painted her as a principled, controlling new mother exercising her legal rights. I painted the hospital as an ethical fortress, correctly refusing to bend its rules for a powerful man. I painted myself as the man caught in the middle, who built the walls he couldn't scale. "You're giving me this on the record?" Martin asked, his notebook forgotten, his reporter's mind racing ahead to the implications. "Everything," I said, "but with one condition. You cannot publish it without also reaching out to Chloe and David for comment. And you must include the hospital's full statement on its visitor policy and conflict of interest rules. This isn't a hit piece, it's a case study." He agreed. 2 days later, the article appeared. The headline was "Restrained, Perfect. The donor at the door, when hospital policy and family conflict collide." It was fair, thorough, and devastating. It quoted Marcus Wellington on the inviolability of patient autonomy. It quoted Sheila Brunner on the security protocols. It quoted briefly a family spokesperson for David and Chloe who said, "This is a private family matter, and we are focused on the health and well-being of mother and child." It quoted me, saying, "I built a wing to welcome new life into the world. I just never imagined I'd need a permission slip from my own family to stand inside it." The effect was instantaneous. My phone blew up. Board members, other donors, friends expressing shock and sympathy. The hospital's PR department went into overdrive, but the most unexpected call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was Linda, the charge nurse. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice tight with stress. I need you to know something. I saw the article." I waited. "When your daughter-in-law gave me the list," she said you had a history of being disruptive, that you might try to force your way in. She said keeping you out was for the safety and peace of the unit." Her voice cracked. "I was following protocol. I was following what the patient told me, but I've worked here 15 years. I knew who you were. I've seen you at fundraisers. It didn't feel right. It's been eating at me." I felt a surge of something dark and cold. Chloe hadn't just excluded me. She had smeared me to the nursing staff to ensure compliance. She had turned me into a security risk. "Thank you for telling me, Linda," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You did your job. You followed the policy. The problem was never with you." I hung up. I looked at the article on my tablet. The private family matter was now public. The iron gate of policy was now being examined in the court of public opinion. And Chloe had just given me, inadvertently, the key to a new kind of pressure. She hadn't just barred a grandfather. She had falsely labeled a major benefactor as a threat to the safety of a hospital unit he helped create. And that, in the world of institutional reputation, was a declaration of war. The call from Marcus Wellington came 37 minutes after I spoke with Nurse Linda. This time, there was no professional sympathy in his voice. It was the clipped, furious tone of a man whose institution was under siege. "Robert, what in God's name are you doing? Talking to a staff nurse, feeding details to a reporter. Do you have any idea the position you've put us in?" "I was contacted by a member of your staff, Marcus," I said calmly. "She was troubled by misinformation she was given to enforce a policy. I listened. As for the reporter, I provided facts about a matter of public interest regarding hospital governance, all within my rights." "Your asterisk rights," he sputtered. "You've created a firestorm. The board is getting calls. The ethics committee is scheduling an emergency meeting. Donors are asking if we let families smear major benefactors. And the plaintiff's bar is circling, wondering if a false claim to staff constitutes defamation or creates a hostile environment." I let his anger hang in the air. "Then it seems the policy isn't the only thing that needs examining. The process that allowed a patient to falsely characterize a board member as a security threat to manipulate that policy might require some review." He went silent. I had him. The hospital's vulnerability wasn't the policy, it was the abuse of the policy, and they were now liable for it. "I want a meeting," he said, finally defeated. You, me, Sheila Brunner, and the head of the ethics committee. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. This needs to be contained. I agreed, but containment was no longer my goal. The meeting was held in the hospital's executive boardroom. The air was frigid. Marcus, Sheila, and a woman named Dr. Aris, the ethics chair, sat on one side of the long table. I sat alone on the other. It felt like a tribunal. Dr. Aris spoke first. Mr. Thorne, the article, while factual, has created significant reputational risk. More concerning are the allegations from Nurse Linda that Ms. Thorne made misleading statements to secure her desired outcome. This places the hospital in a difficult position between patient autonomy and duty of care to its stakeholders, including you. I understand the position, I said. My question is simple. What is the hospital prepared to do about it? Sheila leaned forward. We have spoken with your daughter-in-law. She denies characterizing you as a threat. She states she only emphasized her need for a stress-free environment and that her wishes be respected. Nurse Linda's recollection differs. It's a he said, she said, Marcus interjected. With no recording, it's impossible to adjudicate. The patient's word carries significant weight. I had expected this. The institution would always circle its wagons. So, the solution is to do nothing, to allow the situation and the falsehood to stand. Dr. Aris cleared her throat. Not exactly. The ethics committee believes a mediated conversation between you and your son and daughter-in-law, facilitated by the hospital's patient advocate, might be beneficial, to clear the air, to find a path forward for your family. They were offering me therapy, a mediated chat after a public humiliation and a character assassination. It was an insult wrapped in procedural ribbon. I stood up. Thank you for your time. I'll consider your proposal. I didn't consider it for a second. Instead, I went to my lawyer. Not about the hospital, about my grandson. I asked about grandparent visitation rights. What I learned was a colder shock than any hospital policy. Based on the Troxel versus Granville Supreme Court ruling, my attorney explained, fit parents have a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the care of their children. Courts must give special weight to a fit parent's decision to deny visitation. To even get a hearing, you'd need to prove that denying you access harms Ethan. Given that he's a newborn and you've never met him, that's a nearly impossible bar to clear, and pursuing it would likely cement the alienation permanently. The law, it turned out, was an even higher, more unscalable wall than the hospital. Chloe held all the keys, and every authority structure was designed to protect her grip. I was adrift, powerless. Then the counterattack began. It started with a letter, delivered by courier to my home, from Chloe's father, the retired judge. It was written on his old court letterhead, a subtle power move. It accused me of orchestrating a media campaign designed to harass and pressure a new mother, of weaponizing my philanthropic influence to undermine parental authority, and of causing irreparable damage to family bonds. It demanded I retract my statements to the press, issue a public apology to Chloe, and cease all efforts to circumvent the agreed-upon visitation plan. It was a masterpiece of legalistic intimidation, and it told me everything. Chloe wasn't acting alone. Her entire family had mobilized, seeing me not as a grandfather but as an adversary to be defeated in the court of public opinion and family politics. David called me that night, his voice trembling with a new kind of fear. Dad, you got the letter. I did. Chloe's father, he's talking about a restraining order. He's saying your public campaign is a form of harassment. He's convincing her this is about control, not about Ethan. What do you believe, David? I asked, my heart a stone in my chest. He didn't answer for a long time. I believe I'm losing my mind, he whispered and hung up. The next day, the hospital's PR department released a statement. Mercy General reaffirms its unwavering commitment to patient autonomy and safety. Our visitor policy is designed to protect new mothers and remains unchanged. All communications between patients and staff are confidential. The hospital does not comment on private family matters. It was a full retreat. They had chosen to hide behind policy and privacy, throwing me to the wolves. I was now completely isolated. The institution had abandoned me. The law offered no recourse. My son was paralyzed. My daughter-in-law's family was drawing up legal battle lines, and I still had not held my grandson. This was the nadir, the moment where every path seemed closed, but it was in that absolute stillness that I realized I had been fighting the wrong war. I had been trying to win entry, to gain access, to be granted permission. I was playing by their rules on their board. Chloe was right about one thing. It was asterisk about control, but I had been ceding it at every turn. I needed to change the game, not by demanding to be let in, but by changing what in meant. I didn't make a phone call. I didn't send a letter. I drove to the one place that still held pure meaning, untouched by the conflict. I drove to the cemetery where Evelyn was buried. I sat on the bench near her headstone and I talked to her. I told her about David, about Chloe, about Ethan. I told her about the walls and the policies and the cold, clever letters. And as I spoke to the silent stone, her answer became clear. It was never about the hospital wing. It was about the legacy asterisk outside of it. I went home and I drafted a new set of documents, not legal filings, philanthropic ones. I instructed my foundation to begin the process of endowing a new, separate entity, the Evelyn Reed Thorne Center for Family and Community Health. It would not be a wing in a hospital. It would be a freestanding clinic in an underserved part of the city, focused on prenatal care, postnatal support, and family counseling. It would explicitly serve families regardless of ability to pay, with a mandate to support grandparent inclusion and immediate intra-family conflict. The initial endowment would be 5 times larger than my gift to Mercy General. Then I wrote a personal letter to Marcus Wellington and the entire hospital board. I resigned my board seat, effective immediately. I cited the irreconcilable conflict of interest my family situation had created and my desire to avoid any further perception of attempting to influence hospital policy. I thanked them for their service. It was polite, final, and utterly devastating in its implications. The final step was the public one. I called Martin Ford, the reporter, again. I gave him the story, not as a lament but as a pivot. I provided copies of my resignation letter and the public announcement of the new Evelyn Thorne Center. I framed it not as a retaliation but as a redirection of purpose. Some walls, I told him, are not meant to be scaled. They are meant to show you where to build something new. The article ran 2 days later. The headline, "From Boardroom to Break, Donor Exits Hospital, Launches Rival Family Health Center." The subhead, "Grandfather at Center of Access Dispute Shifts Millions to New Mission." The fallout was nuclear. The hospital board was apoplectic. My resignation was a public vote of no confidence. The launch of a competing family health center, named for my wife who had been one of their beloved nurses, was seen as the ultimate betrayal. Donors began asking pointed questions about how the hospital had lost Robert Thorne. In my son's home, the reaction was silent shock. David called me, not angry but bewildered. "You resigned. You're building a whole new center. Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm building a legacy your mother would recognize," I said. "One that can't be locked out by a visitor list." But the real reaction, the one I hadn't fully anticipated, came from Chloe's family. The judge called me himself. The intimidation was gone, replaced by a strained, pragmatic concern. "Robert, this new project, it's getting a lot of attention, positive attention. The narrative is shifting. People are starting to ask what kind of situation drives a man to do something so dramatic." "It's not dramatic," I said. "It's logical. I found a problem I couldn't solve within the existing system, so I'm helping to build a new one." There was a long pause. "This isn't good for anyone's reputation," he said, finally. It was the closest he would come to admitting they were losing. The power had subtly, irrevocably shifted. I was no longer a supplicant at the gate. I had walked away and started building my own city. And for the first time, Chloe and her allies had nothing to leverage, no policy to hide behind, no board to pressure. They only had a stubborn old man who had decided that if he couldn't hold his grandson in one building, he would build a different one in his grandson's name. The standoff was total, but in that new silent space I had created, a single fragile question finally had room to breathe. What now? The silence lasted 8 days. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw David standing there alone, holding a car seat carrier covered with a clear plastic shield against the rain. My heart stopped. I opened the door. He looked exhausted, but there was a new steadiness in his eyes. "Can we come in?" he asked. I looked down. In the carrier, swaddled in a blue blanket, was a sleeping baby, Ethan. I stepped back, wordless. David brought the carrier inside, set it gently on the floor in the foyer, and unbuckled the straps. He lifted Ethan out, cradling his head with a practiced hand. He held him out to me. "Dad," he said, his voice thick, "this is your grandson." I took him. He was heavier than I imagined, a solid, warm weight. He stirred, made a small sighing sound, and settled against my chest. He had a thatch of dark hair, just like in the photo, and his tiny hand curled around the edge of my shirt. I stood there in my own hallway, holding the child I had fought a war to meet, and I felt every ounce of the fight drain out of me, replaced by a trembling, overwhelming stillness. David watched us, his arms now empty, hanging at his sides. "Chloe is at her parents'," he said. "We've been talking, a lot. The article about the new center, it did something. It didn't make her angry like the first one, it made her quiet. Her dad couldn't spin it as harassment, he called it strategic philanthropy. A legitimate, even admirable response." I didn't look up from Ethan's face. "And what did you call it?" "I called it Mom," David said softly. "I told Chloe that building something for families in Mom's name because you couldn't get to us, that was the most thing you could have possibly done. It wasn't an attack, it was a lighthouse." He walked into the living room and sat on the couch. I followed, still holding Ethan, and sat in my armchair. The rain streaked the windows. "She asked me what I wanted," David continued. "Not what was fair, or what followed the protocol, or what kept the peace. What I wanted. And I told her I wanted my son to know his grandfather. I told her I was tired of being a negotiator in my own family. I told her that if her parents' involvement came with a legal strategy and my father's involvement came with a new community health center, then maybe we needed to rebuild from scratch. Just the three of us." "What did she say?" "She cried," David said, "and then she agreed on one condition." "Name it." "That you come to our house. That you meet Ethan on neutral ground, not here, not at the hospital, our home. And that we talk, all three of us." I looked down at the sleeping baby in my arms. Neutral ground. It was a smart psychological move, a way to reclaim some agency. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow." I went to their house the next evening. I brought nothing but myself. No grand gift, no trust fund papers, no architectural plans for the new center. David answered the door. Chloe was standing in the living room. She looked different, softer, without the defensive armor. Ethan was in a bassinet by the sofa. The conversation was awkward, painfully slow. We didn't talk about the hospital. We didn't talk about the articles or the letters. We talked about Ethan, his feeding schedule, how he liked to be held, the funny face he made when he was dreaming. We talked in safe, baby-centric circles for an hour. Then Chloe took a deep breath. "Robert," she said, using my name but without the old chill. "What you're building, the Evelyn Center." I looked at the mission statement, the grandparent inclusion part. "Was that because of this?" "It was because of Evelyn," I said honestly. "She believed families were ecosystems. If you cut off one part, the whole thing suffers. The center is for her. The principle is because of all this." She nodded, looking at her hands. I was afraid, she said, the words so quiet I almost didn't hear them. Not of you, of losing control. Of this new person, this mother I didn't know how to be. My parents, their way of helping is to take over, to tell me the right way. I thought your generosity, your presence, would be another version of that. A kind, well-funded takeover. So I built a wall. I used the hospital's wall because it was the strongest one I could find. It was the first moment of true, unvarnished honesty. She wasn't a villain. She was a scared new mother from a controlling family who saw control as the only form of safety. I had been the other powerful force in her life, and she had defaulted to battle lines. I wasn't trying to take over Chloe, I said. I was just trying to be there. I know that now, she said. But the wall, once it was up, I didn't know how to take it down without admitting I was wrong. And in my family, being wrong is a weakness. David reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it felt like the most important thing I'd seen in months. The wall's down, I said. It was never my wall to begin with. That was the beginning of the new architecture, fragile, deliberate. I visited once a week. I followed their rules not as a subordinate but as a guest in their home. I held Ethan. I told him stories about his grandmother. I didn't offer unsolicited advice. I just showed up. The hospital board accepted my resignation with a formal, regretful letter. The Evelyn Thorne Center moved from announcement to active planning. I hired a director, a woman with a background in social work and family mediation. When the press asked about the connection to the earlier controversy, I simply said, "Sometimes a personal difficulty shows you a public need." The surprising detail came about 3 months later. I was at David and Chloe's for dinner. Ethan was in a bouncer on the floor. Over coffee, Chloe cleared her throat. "I've been speaking with the director of the Evelyn Center," she said. "The one you hired, Dr. Varma." I was surprised. "You have?" "Yes, I asked if they needed volunteers for their community outreach committee, for the family support programs. I have a background in law, but I think I understand the other side of it now, the isolation." She looked at me, her gaze steady. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to be involved." It was an olive branch of such profound symbolism it took my breath away. She wasn't just allowing me in. She was asking to come into the world I'd built from the wreckage. It was her way of bridging the divide, not as a daughter-in-law seeking permission, but as a partner in the legacy. "I think that would be wonderful," I said, and I meant it. The final loop closed on a bright Saturday in October. The Evelyn Thorne Center held its official groundbreaking ceremony. It was a community event with speeches from city officials and health advocates. I stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. In the front row were David, Chloe, and Ethan, now 7 months old, sitting on his father's lap, wide-eyed. I didn't give a speech about bricks and mortar. I talked about foundations. "We build structures to keep people safe, to heal them, to bring them together," I said. "But the strongest foundation isn't concrete. It's the willingness to show up for each other, even after you've been told to leave. It's the courage to build a new table when you find you're not welcome at the old one." This center is named for my wife, Evelyn, who believed no one should be a stranger in their own family story. Today, we start building her belief into the world. After the ceremony, as people mingled, Chloe walked up to me, holding Ethan. She didn't say anything. She just gently transferred Ethan into my arms and then stepped back to stand beside David. I held my grandson, facing the empty plot of land that would become the center, the future literally unfolding in front of us. The war was over, not with a surrender, but with a truce built on mutual recognition. I had my grandson in my arms. My son was beside me. My daughter-in-law was choosing to be an ally. And on the horizon, a new building would rise, dedicated to ensuring other families might find their way without having to fight through so many locked doors. The cost had been enormous: a board seat, a reputation, months of anguish. But as I looked at Ethan, who grabbed my finger with his whole tiny hand, I understood the calculus. Some things you can't buy, you can't demand, and you can't govern. You can only earn them slowly, brick by patient brick, by being willing to build something bigger than your own pain. People ask me sometimes if I regret the fight, if the cost was too high. The public attention, the resignation, the months of silence from my son. I tell them the truth. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret what I learned in the struggle. We live in a world of systems, hospitals, laws, family protocols. We're told these systems exist to protect us, to create order, to ensure fairness. And often they do. But what happens when the system perfectly executes a wrong? When policy becomes a weapon, when rights become walls, when the very structures meant to safeguard become instruments of isolation? My story wasn't really about a hospital wing. It was about what we do when we find ourselves on the wrong side of a door we helped build. Do we rage at the lock? Do we plead with the gatekeeper? Or do we turn around and survey the landscape, wondering if we've been building in the wrong place all along? I chose, eventually, to build something new, not out of spite, but out of a clarified sense of purpose. The Evelyn Center won't have a visitor list. It will have a welcome table. That distinction cost me more than money, but it taught me more than any board meeting ever did. Authority is the power to say no, to exclude, to bar the door. Leadership is the wisdom to build a longer table, to design a space where the question is, are you on the list? But what do you need? I have my grandson now. I see him every week. The relationship with David is different, stronger in its repaired places, like a bone that heals thicker after a break. Chloe and I are building a cautious, respectful alliance, one committee meeting and one family dinner at a time. The thaw is slow, but it is real. And the hospital, I drive past Mercy General sometimes. I see the wing that bears my family name. I don't feel bitterness. I feel a quiet detachment, like looking at a blueprint for a bridge you designed but never crossed. It serves its purpose. It just wasn't my crossing to make. The final lesson, the one I carry with me, is this. You cannot litigate your way into a family. You cannot donate your way into a heart. You cannot force a moment that must be given freely. All you can do is demonstrate, through unwavering patience and, if necessary, through constructive defiance, what your love is made of. Is it made of demand? Or is it made of dedication so deep that when one path is blocked, it reroutes entire rivers to find another way? My love rerouted a river. It's building a new center in my wife's name. It's holding my grandson in the October sun. It's drinking coffee with my son in a quiet kitchen on a Sunday morning. The foundation holds, not because it was never tested, but because when the pressure came, it was forced to deepen, to spread, to anchor itself in something more meaningful than concrete. It anchored itself in legacy. What you just experienced was one man's story, but the architecture of it, the walls we build, the doors we lock, the new rooms we choose to construct, that's a story happening in families, in institutions, in hearts everywhere. What do you do when you're told you don't belong? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story reshaped how you see conflict, power, or family, consider subscribing. We explore the hidden architecture of human dilemmas, one true story at a time. Thanks for listening.